Welcome to this episode of Viatorian Voices, where our conversations on the way give witness to the ministry and spirituality of walking with youth and those who go underserved. We carry the charism of our founder, the Venerable Louis Querbes, who taught us, "Strive to do everything well, so that through you, Jesus may be adored and loved." Here's your host, Viatorian Associate Dan Masterton.
In this episode, we explore our international Viatorian solidarity with Canada and Father Alain Ambeault. Father Alain professed first vows in 1980 and was ordained a priest in 1986. He served in several leadership roles for the province of Canada and was elected to a 6-year term as our Superior General in 2012, preceding our own Father Mick Egan and succeeding our own Father Mark Francis. Father Alain now serves as the Executive Director of the Canadian Religious Conference, which networks religious communities across the Church in Canada for collaboration. After you listen to this episode, help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life and all people considering Viatorian association. We started by going back to Father Alain's first encounters with the Viatorians in his hometown north of Montreal, where he recalls the young, creative, adventurous Viatorians he knew as great supporters for local young people and their families.
Well, I'm from a little town that is, his name is Lachute. It's about 50 miles from Montreal. And what was interesting when I was a young guy, Lachute was a place for a long time of ministry of Viatorians, specifically in education. And at that time, what we had in Lachute, good number of Viatorians, but young priests and brothers that were so close to young people involved in the school, very close to us, very creative with us. You can't imagine. It was fantastic. Evangelization for them was bringing a bunch of young people in a canoe experience during summertime, doing things like that, and at the same time having time to reflect, to pray. So honestly, where my vocation came from seeing those guys. They looked to me like so honest people committed. I said, my God, I want to do the same. That was the story of my vocation, meeting with Viatorians very involved with young people. And the priesthood was, of course, later after my commitment, but it was quite the same. At the beginning of my religious life, and even in Lachute, it was the same thing. We had the Viatorians involved in parishes when I was with other Viatorian people who wanted to innovate things, being so close to people, build with them a community. Again, at that time, and I was a brother at that time, I said, my God, I want to be a pastor like them. So it was mostly the religious life or priesthood by the contact with very wonderful Viatorians.
So, what is the Viatorian community like in Canada? It certainly holds a special place in our history. Father Querbes' first attempts at missionary outreach to the U.S. near St. Louis and then to India did not succeed, but the third time was the charm. When he sent men to French Canada, the charism took root and became the seed for outreach to the U.S. a couple decades later.
Well, in the history of our congregation, Canada had an impressive development. We always had been half of the congregation, and it was Father Querbes. After sending few brothers in the state and didn't work, they came in Canada, and finally in Canada it worked. We were just in the province of Montreal. In the history, we had 4 provinces in Canada. We were more than 1,000 religious just in one province. Can you imagine? So it was a wonderful development. The Viatorians in Canada, of course, they were like everywhere else, very involved in education, but at the same time, they always had an openness to something else. So they developed a complementary perspective around education, about arts, about cinema, liturgy, presence of young people, disadvantaged people, things like that. So the creativity that I was talking at the beginning, it still exists in the history.
When it comes to the broader sense of the church in Canada, it's a bit of a mixed bag, including some tough realities. Father Alain walks us through it and winds up to a helpful analogy from a friend that looks forward with hope.
The reality of the Catholic Church I would say in Quebec, that's different. Quebec is the French part of Canada. The rest is English. It's two different cultures, two different histories and perspective too. In Quebec in 1960, we had what we call the Quiet Revolution. It means that the church, since the beginning when we were a colony of France, and the church was so dominant in Canada, in every part. After the war, of course, 1960, the society decided, the government decided that's enough. So all the education, social ministry, things like that, now it's the society, the government that assumed that. Means that since that time, the church had lost a lot of power. In the history, the church was so dominant to the people and the structure, the society, that at that time it was like a crash for the Catholic Church. And since that time, we are like a nation here. The life of the Catholic Church is difficult because people said no more. Just the fact that the church was so dominant in the life of the people, telling them what to do, things like that. I don't know when it's going to be the end of that, but it's really difficult, actually, Catholic faith, no, I would say the Catholic structure to be accepted. And more than that, I need to say, with all the abuses and case of abuses that appeared in the last 10 years, I mean, it's really difficult. So that's mainly reality. What is the consequences of that? Since 60s, 70s, 80s, the transmission of faith will not exist anymore. Means that actually younger people, younger generation in a Catholic faith celebration, they are totally lost. The Catholic culture disappeared. It's not all negative. We are facing time when we need to rebuild by the basic, by the local community, by the faith in a family. So that's the new part. I remember a few years ago, a friend of mine was interviewed at the TV station, and they were talking about the reality of the church. And he said, well, the reality of our church, it's like being in the middle of a lake in wintertime. It's frozen. You look at that and you say, everything is dead. No. He said, when you know that under that, still currents, still water, still life. So one day, springtime will come back. But we need to work actually in my country, in the French part mainly, but in my country in general, we need to work in a basic evangelization, basic way of building communities.
American Viatorians went to Colombia in the 1960s following the call of Pope St. John XXIII, which similarly inspired contemporary Viatorians in Canada to go to Haiti and Peru. Yet that was just the middle era of three major waves of a missionary impulse by which Canadian Viatorians brought our charism to serve all around the world.
And there's three movements in that. I would say the East, China first, and Japan, go and evangelize people. So we went to China, and after that, Japan, because we were kicked out of China. That's the first thing. After that, Haiti, I would say Haiti and Peru, it's clearly a response to calls from the Pope, from the Vatican. Burkina Faso, it's totally different. Burkina Faso, of course, it was in the movement of after the chapter 1994, when we decided in 94 that it's important, if we don't want to make our charism die, we need to send the charism, like offer the charism to other culture. And Burkina Faso for us was very special. I know very much that because I was the provincial at that time. And I remember when we deal with that, the new foundation, when I was elected provincial in 98, at the first meeting of the council, I said, because we were talking about that for many years before I was part of the other council, and nothing was happening. So I remember first meeting with my new council, I said, okay, we're gonna make a decision and it's gonna be it. If it's no, it's no. If it's yes, we're gonna do it. We decided yes. And at that time, we were 400 in Canada. So they were looking at me, this young provincial, kind of a dreamer. Okay, you might say that, but nothing will happen. We have Ivory Coast that is close. And we said, well, in the future, they might constitute something together. I announced that again. First of all, everybody was going to see, where is Burkina Faso? Nobody knew that. They were laughing at me. Nobody will accept to do that. Third step, the foundation theme. We spent a time discernment with the council. I remember one day, full day together, the member of the council, and we said, we're going to make a list of 5 confreres. Nobody excluded, myself first. We did the discernment. The 5 members of the council, we had the same list. After that, I had the job to ask everybody. And you can't imagine. I just give you an example, but the 5 of them, it was the same story. I was calling Benoit Tremblay, that at that time was in Peru. I called Benoit. I said, listen, Benoit, I need to go in Peru because I need to meet with you with something important. He said, why? You don't want to ask me to go to Burkina Faso? I said, that's exactly that. Silence that seemed to me like 5 minutes, but it was certainly like 30 seconds. He said, are you serious? I said, yes, so that's the result of our discernment. Well, he said, save a ticket, a flight ticket. I accept. It was like that for the 5 confrères I asked. So Burkina Faso was so special because in the middle of our weakness, we wanted to offer, we did it. And the result of that, it's not only Burkina Faso, but for a while, it was so dynamic in Montreal because we did it. So at the missionary impulse, there were, I would say, 3 different moments. The Haiti in Peru as an answer to the call of the church. In Burkina Faso, the impossible that became possible. For all the years I was involved in the leadership of the congregation, that's clearly the best souvenir I have. It was a moment of grace.
Father Alain served as a general counselor to our own Father Mark Francis when Father Mark was Superior General, and then the community elected Father Alain as Superior General in 2012. He celebrates opening new realities to the members of our Viatorian foundations, and most of all continues to desire deeper, fuller internationality among Viatorians around the world.
I spent 25 years in the council in every part. I assume every function as a counselor, as a vicar, provincial vicar, spirit provincial to mandates, same thing at the General Council. I would say when I was elected in 2012 as spirit general, with humility, it was not a surprise in a sense that I'd been with Mark in his council for 6 years. And at that time, we could imagine that people who can assume that and be available to assume this ministry, there were not too many. So in a sense, it was not a big surprise, but I wanted to give the best of myself in that and to change a little bit the reality. When I was elected, I asked for the first time, 2 members came from the foundation to be part of the council. First, Ari Celestin, that was my vicar from Haiti, and Carlos Flores, that came from Colombia, even if he wasn't the state at that time. But my objective at that time was to open other realities, like the General Council must represent the reality of our congregation. And it was like a tradition before that each province assumed that one will be part of the council. And I said, well, maybe we can move from that. I would say it was a great experience. It's not easy, but it's a great experience. As an international community, we need to discover a better unity. That's the challenge we have in front of us. Like in a sense of belonging to something that is bigger than the boundary of our own place. This difficulty makes the international leadership quite difficult because everybody is doing his own thing. And when we try to say, okay, what we are doing in our own country or province has an influence on the entire congregation. And what we are not doing, same thing. The choice we are making in our own province or country has an effect on the entire congregation. And I wanted at that time, and I worked for that, to get another sense of our international belonging. There's people who say, oh, we don't want the community centralized. And we are not talking about that. We are talking about co-responsibility. Feeling responsible, myself as a Canadian, about what is happening in the state, what is happening in Colombia, what is happening in Africa, what is happening in other countries, being co-responsible. In the 60s, we lived in our congregation a special moment when we decentralized a lot. At that time, the General Council had a very big power about everything, decentralization to the province, and it was wonderful for many years. But we needed later on to adapt, not to give more power, but together to assume, as I said, the co-responsibility of the development of the congregation. I work on that during these years. And when I was visiting every country, my conviction was that we have a great community everywhere. The problem is having an openness. The problem is having the conviction of, in every country, every culture, we must make the encounter between the charism of curbs and the culture there, and develop something that has sense for this part of the world. And after that, the other movement, like benefit from the perspective of all of that. Last General Assembly, that's exactly that. When we hear about what is happening everywhere, we say, okay, I would say, well, I know my country, I'm glad of what we are doing, but I'm even more glad when I see that something is happening everywhere. We need to move on in this perspective. We need to go on in this perspective.
So then, what would a Viatorian with 45 years of religious life, international ministry, and myriad experience say to someone considering Viatorian life? Well, if you're drawn to modeling our faith and accompaniment of others, especially young people, then we're the community for you.
What did Father Curbs wanted at the beginning? He wanted to choose the name of our congregation. The word that he insists to have was catechist. And what is a catechist? It's someone that wants to accompany other people in the faith. It's not the one that is teaching to others, to accompany. Is interested in our fractured world, to accompany other people. Accompany, it's to walk with people. Give them the opportunity to see what is important for them and be part of this accompaniment. Well, this is the place, the Viatorian, because I said it before, just remember our wonderful mission to foster community where faith is lived, deepened, and celebrated. That's an answer, a wonderful answer for people who want to walk with others.
That's all for this episode of Viatorian Voices. We'd like to thank Father Alain for his witness and the many ways he has served our community in his religious life. To learn more about the province of Canada, visit viateurs.ca. That's viateurs.ca, and use a translation tool to explore the French website. Or to learn more about Father Alain's Canadian Religious Conference, visit crccanada.org/en. That's crccanada.org/en. Most importantly, remember you can help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life and all people considering Viatorian association.
Viatorian Voices, Conversations on the Way, is a production of the Viatorian community. Viatorians are professed brothers and priests, and women and men, lay associates. Together we proclaim Jesus Christ and the gospel and raise communities where faith is lived, deepened, and celebrated. In the footsteps of the Venerable Louis Querbes and under the patronage of Saint Viator, we strive to do everything well, so that through us, Jesus may be adored and loved. To learn more about our community, visit Viatorians.com or follow us on social media at Viatorian USA. Young adults can connect with faith-filled peers at Viatorian YA on the Way on Instagram, where Viatorian young adults are walking together in faith. We invite people seeking accompaniment in exploring God's invitations to reach out to vocation ministry. Send a DM on social media or email vocations@viatorians.com to start a conversation. Viatorian Voices is produced and hosted by Associate Dan Masterton, Director of Communications. Our Provincial Superior is Father Mark Francis. Voiceovers by me, Associate Dan Schwarz. Until next time, Venerable Louis Querbes, inspire us. Saint Viator, pray for us. Adored and loved be Jesus.